All right. I don't have a good one, so I'll pound my fist on the table. Welcome, everybody. Okay, we'll call the meeting to order, but we'll take just a minute if nobody minds to give Catherine a second to see if she has that presentation.
Thank you.
While Catherine is searching, I have some pre-opening remarks, if that's okay with everybody. Just a couple of things. First, I want to, and I see Kirk is on the phone, I want to take a second and thank again Kirk and our Public Works team. They worked really hard today. I saw it firsthand. I'm working to try to keep the roads and our sidewalks and other public spaces safe and clean. And I know it's particularly tough with this one because he's had some folks out ill with the flu and so forth. So they did a tremendous job with relatively short staff. So thank you for pass those thanks on to your team.
Will do. Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome. Second, we were going to do a presentation to honor Diane Newman Hernstorff right after this meeting. We're going to postpone that till February 5th. So I hope everybody can come back February 5th, right after our Board of Selectmen meeting. Just thought it was safer and easier for people who wouldn't otherwise be here. We have some cookies and brownies that we brought for the presentation that now have to get eaten. So please, after the meeting, have one. Or take one home. Why you laughing at me?
Freeze them, bring them back.
No.
Somebody will find time tomorrow to help you.
Yeah. So in case you couldn't heard Peggy, her idea was to freeze them and use them again in 2 weeks, which I told Betsy we needed to do, but she refused. She said, just make sure they get eaten and we'll get them done. So, all right. Catherine, are you ready to go? Do you have what you need?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So now, another thank you to all of you here in the room and on Zoom, to our team members who are here and on Zoom. We're grateful for both the teams on the school district side and the town side for the work you've already done. It's hard work. We know how hard it is, tough decisions, and we're really only in the beginning of this process, so there'll be lots more hard work and lots more tough decisions to do before we get here. And we're grateful for everybody who's here and on Zoom and who's put their work in so far to this point. The intent for those in the public who are watching is this is the very first cut at our next budget. The intent is to make sure our stakeholders and our citizens have the best information that we have available to us now in terms of what our priorities are, or what we suggest our priorities are, and what the constraints are. It is only the beginning. We will end up in an entirely different spot than we are tonight. Everybody in this room knows that. But I think we've done a good job, and I think that is our job, is to start out with identifying what we think the priorities are so that the public can make an educated decision on helping us choose between those priorities. Anybody have anything anywhere on any of that they want to add before we roll into it? So I hope no one will be insulted. We did this on purpose to kind of get us not some up and some down, but to be more collaborative. So I apologize for the close quarters, and I apologize in advance. Unless you tell me otherwise, I'm going to refer to you by your first name, regardless of your title. Is that cool with everybody? All right. All right, I'll start. Just giving a quick introduction on what I tend to do is have the chairs of each committee when we get to you do a preliminary presentation, and then I'll let each board go, and then we'll come back and see if we missed anybody. Does that make sense? All right. So we won't go into too much detail in the towns plus one. We're happy to answer any questions that we have or that anybody has. I think it's laid out pretty systematically in the memo that I hope everybody has and has available to them. It's just what I suggested in my opening remarks. It's an identification of those items in the budget for which we are either contractually obligated to do, or for all practical purposes, we're committed to do even if we don't have a contract. It also then lays out some areas of focus and priorities that the Board of Selectmen voted to include in the +1, again, for purposes of identifying what we think those are and for having a full discussion about them. And the memo also identifies some requests from our team members, not all of them, but a couple of significant ones that I thought I would highlight that we were not able to work into this budget. So I think unless anybody suggests otherwise, we'll go just to page 2 of our memo. Right about in the middle of the page, it says +1 detail. And that sort of breaks down by very broad categories. That obviously is not a complete list of all of the items and or really all the categories of items, but just the highlights. There's a couple that I will point out, and then just briefly, and we'll move through them quickly. So one of the constraints both teams are dealing with, but we're dealing collectively with, is what we're thinking is going to be a significant increase in our health insurance costs. We currently have budgeted a 17% increase. We'll work very hard between now and when we have to finalize the budget to put it in front of the voters to get that as close as we can. We should, between now and then, get a couple more months of experience that we can rely on to hone that number down. I would like to warn everybody, at least from my perspective, that honing it down doesn't necessarily mean it'll go down. It may, in fact, go up based on what our experiences are. We're self-funded, so that cost fluctuates based on what our actual needs and experiences are. But we will watch that very closely. It's a significant number for the town, and of course, as you'll hear, it's a much more significant number for the school district because they have more employees that are subject to the health plan. Also, the other couple things that I will highlight under other contracts, these are not big numbers, but they're I think, illustrative of what the kind of things that we're talking about in these budgets. So one is the audit costs. So they're going to go up again. We know they're going to go up again. We're contractually obligated to pay them. I can assure you that our finance director and Mike and I earlier this year, I'm losing track of my years, or actually I guess late last year, we balked. We asked the auditor to not increase those fees, but the market is not good for buyers in the auditor market. And so there's really not a lot we can do about that, for example. And then a couple of the other things we highlighted there are just to illustrate that we are building on a promise I think we made, a commitment we made to improve our IT infrastructure and processes. And so when you do that, you have software increases and ongoing increases. So you'll see some of those summarized in the other contracts line. If you go to the very next page, and I apologize the way this formatted, but it'll work out okay. That's really just the bottom half of that last chart. This is another one that I think is worth highlighting. This number, again, is not particularly large in and of itself, but that's an increase in our election services. Because of the state law changes primarily requiring early voting, I think we have something like 27 days of voting that we have to cover now that are new. And that cost is mandated. There's nothing we can do about it. We just have to try to manage it the best we can. To the best of my knowledge, as we're sitting here today, the state is offering no help to reimburse us for those costs. That number is the 3,200 plus or minus that we built into the current budget. really doesn't do anything other than pay our paid registrars to handle the early voting days themselves for all practical purposes. To remind everybody, we're very, very fortunate that the vast majority of the work done at all of our elections, and now including early voting, is done by unpaid volunteers. I'm going to repeat that, unpaid volunteers. And so many towns are no longer getting away with that. They're having to pay their volunteers. We're lucky in Granby that we have people who are committed to our community at a level that we don't have to do that. Still, notwithstanding that, we will have increased cost in our elections that there's almost nothing we can do about. And then on the next page, you'll see more detail on some of the continuing on into some of those other areas where we have to build on programs we have, or we're recommending that we build on programs we have. There's no significant numbers there except for the top three, and I'll spend just a minute on each one of those to explain our thinking behind putting them in the +1 budget. And then I think we'll be prepared to answer any questions you have. So the top three shown on page 4 are areas of focus that we've included in the budget, and I'll just go through them in order. The first is to add a person in the Public Works Department. I was educated recently as we were putting this budget together that if we do that and the voters approve it, we're actually only getting ourselves back to the staffing levels of 2010, when we had some struggles with the budget due to the economic conditions. So as I recall, although that was before my time, in 2010, we cut 2 positions from Public Works to be able to accommodate or to address the economic conditions back then. And over the years, we've only filled 1 of those 2 positions. So we were getting the team back to the 2010 level, while at the same time, I think it's almost self-explanatory that in the last 13 years, their workloads have increased steadily, if not dramatically. We have aging infrastructure that we do a pretty good job of maintaining, but as it gets older and more repairs are done, it takes more time and effort to do it. And the other area that we're seeing, I think, some increased demand is our Park and Rec team has done a great job of increasing their programming, and that's increased the burden on our Public Works team, who has to maintain the fields and the buildings and stuff like that. So that's the thought behind that one. The second item is to convert our IT management from a outside contract to bringing that in-house and working with the school district to combine the team so we have one IT team serving both systems. It's something that I believe the teams have been talking about for quite some time. We put together a memorandum of understanding for us to sort of actually test it in place now. And so we have already, in fact, disengaged our outside consultant who did a reasonably good job of getting us from where we were a couple of years ago in terms of just beginning to rebuild our IT infrastructure to now where we're going to have to manage it. There's increased cost to do that when you bring somebody in-house. Obviously, most of that is in benefits, actually. There is some trade-off in the cost in what we don't pay the consultant. But my pitch to everybody who's working on this budget and who will decide whether to vote for it is, at least initially, a lot more than just about the savings. We need to make sure that our systems are secure, and they are definitely much more secure on the town side with this new plan in place. And it gives us great opportunities that I think we'll be able to go through in the next couple of years to find those efficiencies and work on combining systems and combining support systems. So that's, in my mind, just almost a must to be able to properly maintain in today's environment where things are changing and the attacks on security are never ending, our IT systems. And then the next one that I will spend any time on unless people have questions is the next one, which is currently our human resource functions are handled by a part-time employee. It's 20 hours a week, right, Kimmy?
Yes.
A maximum 20 hours a week. And my own personal belief, and I believe it strongly enough that, and I believe the Board of Selectmen does enough to put it in front of everybody for a discussion, is that we need to change that. It's been that way for a long time, and the human resource functions are parallel or very similar to the IT functions. There's so many regularly changing state and federal rules and other requirements that what's happening and what will happen, I think, if we don't make a change, it'll just continue to exasperate, is we cannot avoid the human resource functions. They can't be avoided. So we either pass them on to other department heads, or we find a more efficient way to do it. I think it's short-sighted to pass them on to the other department heads because we're taking away from their expertise and their ability to do their jobs efficiently. So that's another long-term move that I think makes very good sense. We've also found it hard to do some of the long-range stuff. For those of you that remember our strategic goals and objectives, there's one specifically that mentions doing a top-to-bottom review of all of our staffing town-wide, what everybody is doing, where's their overlap, where are their gaps, where do we need transition planning, and I can assure you we need it at least a few spots. That's nearly impossible to get done without a human resource manager who can lead it, unless, again, you want your other top managers doing it. And so I think this is a better plan, worthy of consideration. The rest of this stuff is, I think, pretty self-explanatory, but I think I'll end there. And before we take any questions, members of the Board of Selectmen, Peggy, we can start with you. Anything you want to add or correct me on?
No, I think you did a good job explaining everything.
All right. Thank you. Mark?
I'll follow up with you on the HR section. Previously, there was a department head who was taking on that function. She's already retired, and there's been a gap ever since she retired. And I think it's an advantage for us to actually bring a full-time person in to fill that role.
Okay. Anything else? Kelly?
Nothing to add?
Nothing to add.
Fred, all right. Kimmy? All right. Anybody else have any questions on that? You're giving me the eye, Mike. Do you have any questions?
Not tonight.
Fair enough. Public will take your all questions at the end, as has been our tradition in our Board of Selectmen meetings. So anybody else before we move on to Monica and the Board of Ed +1? We good? All right.
I'm going to be going into a little bit more detail on our slideshow presentation prior to that. Excellent. Okay, before I get started, I just want to thank Sherry and Anna and the rest of the board for all their help in preparing this. The board in our past few meetings really had some excellent questions before we got to this point. So very helpful in preparation for this event. Next slide, please. Oh, we're there. All right. The primary focus here is our schools are Granby's future, and they're a worthy investment. They're a strong epicenter of our community, develops community communications, or community connections, communication and engagement. This budget is very, very bare bones. Very similar to what Mark was talking about in regard to contractual obligations, things that we are committed to doing or things that we have to get done. This budget has no new programs or initiatives, no new preventative methods for students or families in need, and it maintains and reduces spending in order to meet our contractual obligations. If the future of our students and community of Granby is to be a priority, we need to find ways to grow and be future ready. Next slide, please. All right, like I said, this is nothing but the basics here. Our contractual obligations are up 4.34%. Special education is up 2.43%. As you can see here, the contractual obligations include salaries, which make up the bulk of our budget, and benefits. The health plan, transportation, fuel, oil, electricity, all the things that are necessary in order to make our district run. Special education includes out-of-district tuition, out-of-district transportation, as well as personnel. Next slide, please. It's hard to do from this angle. Other areas that were taken into consideration amounted to a reduction of 0.34%. While there was an increase in things like software, substitutes, student activities, textbooks, dues and fees, repairs and maintenance, et cetera, things that are, again, necessary to make sure that our district is running on time. There was a reduction in, as a result of retirements, and that was 78,000, and reductions in staff, 3.98 full-time, based upon declining enrollment. Basically, these areas are areas where we have some control, but we tried to do our best to keep any necessities that we were able to be flexible on as low as possible. Next slide, please. Here we have a lovely pie chart that Anna created for us to give us a great overview of the variety of our expenses in our operational budget. As you can see here, the regular education salaries and benefits amount to the bulk of our operational budget. It's $22.4 million. That's 60.1% total. The other larger sections of the pie are the special education salaries and benefits. That's in orange toward the bottom left. And that's a little over 5 million, 5.4 million, or 14.1%. Followed by other special education costs, which include out-of-district transportation and out-of-district tuition for a total there of 10.6%, or approximately $4 million. The smaller parts, supplies, purchase services, building maintenance, legal insurance, buses, and utilities. All right, next slide, please. So the operating budget projection for FY25 is 6.43%. As you can see here, it is an increase from last year and a bigger increase from 23. One of the things that's important to highlight in regard to 23 was the tail end of the ESSER grants that we were receiving. We were receiving additional funds from the government in regard to COVID relief funding. We no longer have that available to us, but we still require a variety of the services that those ESSER grants were funding. Things like classroom academic support, summer enrichment programs, mental health assistance. So these are things that we still need, but we no longer have the grant to help. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. Next up, I was going to discuss outside impacts, those things that we have absolutely no control of in determining our budget. Right now, as many people know, we are suffering from a staff turnover, and there's an increasingly high teacher demand, not just in Granby, but throughout the entire country. Record numbers of teachers are leaving the profession, so there is obviously a great demand for excellent teachers. We're very fortunate to have excellent teachers in Granby, but there is a high demand for qualified teachers throughout the entire state, which requires us to be competitive in order to get those teachers into our schools to teach our children. There are less early career teachers available, so that means that we have to pay teachers coming in a little bit more than we would pay a newer teacher to come in. So we're hiring at a higher level on the salary scale. We're having reduced savings with teacher retirements. I remember toward the beginning where I brought up the savings that we had as a result of teacher retirements. We're not going to have that same gap going forward if we're hiring at a higher level. So That is an issue as well. And our neighboring districts in our community are paying more than we are. So it makes it harder for us to obtain talent without rising to those standards. Thank you. Continuing along the lines with outside impact, as we all know, because we all experience this every day, U.S. inflation is up 3.4%. The cost of most goods and services have experienced a substantial increase. Benefit costs for us have been up 11.6%. We have several unfunded state mandates that we are required to comply with. These have to come from our own pocket, but we are required to do them. There are over 300 pieces of education-related legislation introduced last session. Some of the examples include special education required services through the age of 23, our new Bears Academy that's over at the YMCA, which is really doing fantastic things, and we have a lot of opportunity over there. There's a change in kindergarten starting age. There's a right to read legislation that we have to comply with, and things like play-based learning, which requires additional training by all of our teachers and staff. Demand is also high for substitute teachers. As we've discussed before, there's been an increase in regard to substitute teachers. Lots of teachers there's a lot of absences. And standards have changed in regard to when we go to work or when we go to school in regard to when you're sick. I think as a result of that, there's been an increase for the need for substitute teachers. Contracted services, including special education services and mental health supports, are high as well, based upon the needs not only of our community, but the surrounding community as well, meaning that it's competitive to get individuals who can provide these services into our district. Our Granby's nursing contract was up, as well as the busing contracts were up as well, just based upon mere demand and necessity for these. Nurses in particular are in short supply, and contracts are very competitive. All right. The Quality and Diversity Fund, or what we often abbreviate to Q&D, this is the fund that supports all Granby Public School students with funding from the Open Choice Program. What's really great about the Q&D fund is the opportunity for flexibility in how we spend it. We're able to use quality and diversity funds for a variety of different projects, including school social workers, magnet and vocational school tuition, one-on-one computing, school-based tutors for academic support, and we recently have an intervention specialist in middle school math budgeted as well from Q&D, and then 8 student enrichment clubs. The key to the Q&D budget from the Open Choice Program is really flexibility to help us fill those gaps and take away from putting various costs in the operational budget. All right, next up, small capital needs. With small cap, the Educational Capital Improvement Fund is in collaboration with the town to support things like transportation and equipment, furniture and fixtures, technology purchases, and building maintenance projects. You can go to the next slide, please. Here, the small cap fund is used for technology, bus lease payments, and other school needs for one-time purchases and repairs. We haven't had a large capital improvement cycle in a while, and it's also used for larger building and maintenance needs such as security, fire doors, alarms, and keying systems. We are in need of more than the typical $1 million appropriation from the town to get our building security and other infrastructure concerns, just like Mark mentioned with the infrastructure challenges as he was facing as well, to keep our buildings up to par and keep them safe for our students to attend. It's broken down for, as you can see, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. The amount in the budget, $13,200, is very minimal. These are for things like carpets, things that need to be cleaned and maintained to keep our schools sanitary, transportation and equipment, technology, and then the building maintenance projects, which as I just discussed, included things like security, fire doors, alarms, and keying systems. Large capital needs. The Large Capital Improvement Fund is in collaboration with the town to support larger projects. This would include a variety of bigger projects for the future, things that we're looking ahead to that need to be taken care of. Once again, in regard to infrastructure improvements, so there's been some significant wear and tear on some of our buildings that needs additional work. The track, turf and field repair, upgrades and replacements, bathroom repairs and renovations for our aging buildings. The middle school is about 32 years old, and there's just normal wear and tear on the plumbing. That's going to need to be improved to keep that building functioning for our students. The Granby Middle School is in need of some instructional space renovation to bring it a little bit more up to speed to how teaching happens these days. HVAC controls and rooftop units, sprinkler systems, underground oil tank removal with a conversion to propane for, I believe, Kelly Lane and Wells. Is that?
Yes.
Parking lot repairs and paving, roof replacement for Kelly Lane, Wells Road, and Central Services. Again, these are all very basic functions that over time that we will need to prepare for. All right. So, like I said, this budget really focuses on nothing but the absolute basics to make sure that our schools are safe and functional for our students. This budget focuses on our contractual obligations and special education costs, which we are obligated to provide. It provides for current special education needs only. It maintains curriculum and instruction needs. It's hugely impacted by rising costs and inflation, just as we all suffer from individually. And it's future focused for our small and large capital improvements moving forward and keeping our buildings safe and sound. All right, any questions? And I will be relying heavily on Anna and Sherry to help answer any of these questions you might have. They're the experts.
Did everyone receive a copy of
Any other members of the Board of Ed? Just start down at that end, Dave?
Nothing on.
Nothing there.
Any other questions from the board members? Okay. Mike, well, now we'll let you go and tell us why we can't pay for any of that.
Well, the utility of the process to meet now, big improvement over the way it used to be many decades ago, where basically Board of Finance or even the operating boards wouldn't see the needs as presented by the administrations until February and March. And by starting earlier, we get a sense of what you're looking at, just as you folks get a sense of what we're looking at. And it's not just the FY25 budget, but in the documents that you folks present, you're looking ahead beyond that so that we have a sense of what's coming, which I would note the small cap here is almost double what you showed us last year for a small cap for fiscal 25. But that's the consequence of the 1.8 plugged in at this point. On the worksheet, which essentially the basis is last year's worksheet at budget time. It plugs in, instead of the assumption of 3% operating, it plugs in the actual request numbers. In the +1, obviously, they're not the final request. We're months away from them coming from the respective administrations through the boards to finance. But the implications, the impact is very, it catches your eye. It's a mill rate change of 5.0%. 2.5%, which we haven't seen in a while. Part of it last year, the revenue picture was pretty strong. We had the car tax money, which we don't have this coming year. We did not have much of a draw from general fund last year because of the car tax money. We knew it would disappear for this next fiscal year because of the drop in the mill rate. And at the same time, there's a heavy draw from the general fund in this year's upcoming budget, fiscal 25, plus in the following years, although it does decrease by $250,000 each year going forward. But that's what we have to contend with. So from our side, we have to work through a number of pieces, not just the operating, not just capital, but the revenue picture as well. Grand list number we'll get by January 31st when it has to be sent into OPM. The governor's budget, he addresses the legislature the first Wednesday of February. It's not certain whether his adjustments to the second year of the two-year state budget will be known that day or subsequent. Usually they come out then, but going through one of the legislators, they couldn't get a commitment that that was going to be the case. They did say not to expect much of a change. So till we hear different, in terms of state money, we use what we have, which the only real difference is there's roughly, I think, a $50,000 decrease each year in ECS going forward. And that's built into it. The grand list, I think, will probably come in slightly higher than what's projected here, but we'll see. It's early, but it shows the difficulty and the challenges that we collectively have to work through to come up with a budget package that the boards can support and take forward and ask the public to approve. In a nutshell, that's where it is. It's not necessarily a pretty picture, but we got our work cut out for us, so be it. My board, if you have any additional comments, you're welcome to add them.
I think we've been very, very fortunate in the last 3 years in terms of controlling the mill rate increase to very, very low numbers. 2.38 was the highest, and a couple of years of zeros. And that has all happened to some very, very fortunate kinds of things that have happened, not only in the economy, but also from the state. And we thank all those contributions, if you will, that have made it very, very easy, or relatively easy for the taxpayers. In the meantime, we've had a reevaluation approach. And I'm afraid to say that even though the net sum of evaluations, revals, is zero in terms of the impact on the town, it has had a detrimental impact on a number of stakeholders, i.e. citizens, and the property evaluations. So even though the mill rate went down from close to 40 down to about 30, when they multiply that 30 and the increase in terms of the evaluation, they find themselves even paying more than they did in the past. That's a very, very negative statement, if you will, as to where the mentality might be of that voting public. And so when I look at the the results here from our work, which I applaud. It's been very, very good, very detailed, very thorough. I can't tell you how much I respect our financial resources in terms of pulling these numbers together and coming up with that. Anna, Kimmy, you need to be really accomplished in what you've done, and you have done it for us, and I appreciate that. But when you come down to the net mill rate increase that's projected here with the numbers that we've talked about at 5%, I have a very difficult time understanding how the average bear or average citizen or taxpayer will support a 5% increase. Yes, the economy has been terrible, inflation has been terrible, but a lot of people have suffered underneath that and have come back with less disposable income than they used to have. So now to tax them with an additional 5% mill rate increase becomes very, very difficult, in my mind, to satisfy. So I think we need to, as I always said, really fine tune our pencils and figure out what we can do. Maybe there's some things that we can delay into the future. For instance, the public works person that we want to hire, $144,000. We've done without that person up to now. Maybe we can stretch for another year with that. And the same similar kinds of things on the education side. Maybe there's a way of deferring that. Maybe we can put some of the aspects of large cap into a project or program that looks at CPAC in terms of how we fund that through other means, if you will, in the future, as to putting some of that into the short term. So frankly, I would have a difficult time supporting 5% unless there's a Christmas tree in the legislature in Hartford, which I doubt. That'll make some of our issues disappear. So we have to find out what happens in terms of the legislative process, government, the funding for cities and towns, and then we'll see where we are. But in the meantime, I think we have to work very, very hard to manage this going down. 5% is not something that's possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill?
I've said this before, I'm a longtime resident, and the only time I've experienced a negative vote on the budget in this town is when we asked to build a middle school. And it took, I can't remember, Mike, was it 4 or 5 votes to pass a budget?
Well, the 80s, you had about every third year, the budget was defeated. Capital, the middle school, there's a couple of capital votes and one vote on expanding Kearns that was defeated. Different times, the numbers were different, and the real fear was what taxes we're going to do. And that's where the planning work came in, the larger CPAC modeling, but this worksheet that's kind of extrapolated from it. And we try to keep the mill rate changes fairly stable. The mill rate change since at least a dozen years has averaged less than 2%. And with inflation, what have you, this year is going to be a different year. But personally, I think the 5's not going to go, and I think we'll end up just under 3 or somewhere in the 3s with mill rates between the spending less than what we're looking at and revenues. It's too early to talk about what those will be. I mean, usually the numbers work themselves through, but sometimes bad things happen too. The health, 17, it could end up it's 15, it could end up it's 20. Something else could be a wrench thrown into the works that create a problem. It's very early. We've got to work together. There's different ways to handle certain things. Well, part of what we're seeing is the impact from inflation too. You see it with the contracts. You see it with the costs of, as an example, the health insurance, but you see it with everything that you're buying, parts and public works, what have you, supplies. So we'll see where we end up, but it's, you've got a fair amount of work that we've got to do, both the operating board level and collectively, putting a package together that we think, yes, addresses the needs of the town and is supportable in terms of a vote by the public.
Where I was at was, is that the negative atmosphere that gets created in the town through a defeat of a budget goes on and on and on. And it took an ungodly amount of meetings, talking, one-on-one situations with residents as your friends to get that swung around back to a positive atmosphere. And I, personally, I can't endorse this start, because I don't want to see that again. It was very, very uncomfortable.
So I would echo my colleagues here. Yes, I mean, I think it's a good start, good +1 where we're looking at. And, there's still a lot of variables where we got to understand from the state point of view. I look forward to hearing a lot more detail from the Board of Ed on the small cap projects and the security concerns, building updates. So we'd love to kind of really understand what that ask is, if you do it, don't do it, and what that means. So yeah, look forward to all those kind of discussions. From the staffing ads, I know, we've talked a little bit around, savings, but, how can we understand some of those future savings a little bit more, understand the costs, what those positions will provide. And again, if we don't do it, what does that cost to the town? I think oftentimes that needs to be in our narrative when we're talking to our friends and family around, why a 5% budget or a 3% budget, right? And so why you want to try to sell your neighbor on voting for that. So I look forward to a lot more of that detail kind of coming out, and look forward to working with all of you on the process.
In the past, +1 budgets sometimes became wish lists, right? And it's a bar set that we then come under and everybody feels great about. The scary part about this budget is there's not a whole lot of wish list in it, which makes this a lot more difficult of a process. Contracts get negotiated in good faith, and this is the time where they come home to roost, right? This is when we have to figure out how to fund them. Eventually, they need to be funded, and as Mike mentioned, and it's something that's really important for the town to note, everybody who's watching it now and will watch it in the future, as Mike said, we had been contributing from the general fund, which some in our town have said, why do we have such a large general fund? Well, we've been contributing almost $750,000 every single year to keep the mill rates within reach. Last year was less, but we had an over $1 million contribution with the car subsidy that we were getting from the state. This year, it's a $2.2 million feed from the general fund. Next year, another $2 million feed. So we're talking about over $4 million over the next 2 years to keep a 5 mill rate or a 3 mill rate. Not to mention the money that we've been budgeting for out of the general fund to pay for a communication system, which again, reiterate, is the safety of every single resident in the town, which it should be our highest priority. We've been very lucky, as Mike said, with the stiff rate, right? And we've been earning some good interest on that. That goes away, $1 million a year goes away in contribution to the general fund or, in earnings. There could be a lot of $1 million gaps that can hit us like that, special ed like that. A number of things that we have no control over. There are not a lot of places to pick up $1 million in revenues. So we have to continue as residents to put a lot of pressure on the state government, who likes to not fund little towns like ours, and they like to fund big cities. And ultimately, there are a lot of dynamic components like the grand list, what the state, even when they promise they're going to pay us for certain things, end up actually paying us. They love to take the credit when they make it very public on what they're going to contribute, but when they don't, they never have their feet held to the fire, and they just keep getting reelected. That was my little soapbox moment. But it's going to take, as my colleagues have already stated, 5% is not something that many of us are going to be able to support, never mind get passed by the town. So looking forward to all the areas where we said if we invest, there's savings. We'd like to understand what those savings are. They may not hit this fiscal year, but could hit future fiscal years. That could help lower the burden in the future from general fund contribution, maybe. So looking forward to seeing where the efficiencies are with some of the investments that we're looking to make. But there's not a whole lot of fluff in this budget, which is the scary part.
Okay. Anything else from board members before we go to the?
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'd like to speak.
Go ahead, Jenny.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank
Yes.
you. I guess I'm sorry I can't be there in person. We had a nice snow day. I guess I have a pretty different take than what I just heard from most of my colleagues on the Board of Finance, and maybe I'm just the eternal optimist. But first of all, I don't think we're going to end up at 5% because I think we've been very conservative. I think the spreadsheet is conservative in the revenues. I'm not criticizing that at all. I think we can only go with what we know right now. But I think we've got, and I think we know we've got some opportunities there. And so that's in play. We have both general fund and other funds to look at. One reason I come at it a little bit differently is that I think this town has been very well managed financially for a lot of years, and thanks to some of the people sitting at the table, not necessarily including myself, because I wasn't there that long. But because we've been managed well, and we look ahead a couple years, and we try to keep things relatively stable for our taxpayers, we've got without cutting into the bone, we've got ways to manage this that I don't think we're going to end up at 5%. Having said that, I would like to encourage, I know I am going into this budget process, and I'd like to encourage my colleagues and our paid staff to go on offense a little bit. We have a very attractive town. People are standing in line at the doors to buy homes. And I realize that's a problem for some people because it means the values of their homes go up. But we owe it to the citizens to at least maintain the services and the quality of life that they want to be here for. And that is heavily weighted by education. So we've got to be very careful to balance that. We have benefited from the special funds that came available to us through COVID. And we are now, those have dried up and inflation has hit. But if you look at the notion that over the last, 10 years, the mill rate increase has been under 2%, that's pretty damn good. And And I know from the 10 years I spent on the Board of Ed and a couple years now I've been on the Board of Finance, I've said it before and I'm going to say it again, I do not believe this town has an expense problem. I think we have a tax base that struggles to deliver the quality of services that our taxpayers want. And that's why we're always having this conversation at this time of year. And when somebody says, why don't we run it more like a business? I like to point out that businesses make investments. Sometimes we do need to make investments to save money in the long term. I don't see those investments in this budget. I think we're going to have to talk about some of those after the budget season's over. But in any event, the ones I think we'll get. I hope that everybody will be open to working to get to a number that we believe is the right number for our taxpayers. And I would add that an awful lot of taxpayers stepped forward this past year to support the teachers when it became clear that we were getting behind, and that could impact adversely the quality of education. And people said, what can we do to support the teachers? And I want to say to the public now, what we can do to support the teachers is support the budget. So wherever we end up, and my guess is it'll be somewhere between 3 and 5, we're going to have to go back to those people and say, we've done the hard work, we're putting forward what we think is in the best interest of the town. Now you've got to get out and support the budget, and let's go on offense this year instead of always being on defense. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jenny. Any other board members? Will you be my timekeeper? Okay, we'll go to comments and questions from the public. Is there anybody in the room? Doesn't look like it. So we'll go to Zoom. Just a reminder, we're going to try to follow the same rules and guidelines that we use on the Board of Selectmen meeting. So if you want to speak, we'll limit your comments to 5 minutes. We'll set a timer. We'll actually buzz when it goes off so that we're not distracted by watching to see how much time you have left. If what you have tonight is a question, I'll make the judgment on whether I think we can answer it fully and completely tonight. If we can, we will. If not, we will absolutely make note of it and make sure we address it in our future deliberations as we get from where we are tonight to and work through the process. And of course, we'll do the same with any other thoughts that you have that you want to share with us. Anybody on Zoom?
Hello?
Sure.
Hello?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, Susan Regan. I've done this horse before, but I'm going to stay on it. What about East Street Farm and Kern School? Now, we submitted an inquiry this afternoon to which Abby Kenyon responded to with regard to the house at 137 Hot Meadow. Sandbrook, sorry, 137 Sandbrook, which is more or less next to Kern School. And asked her if she knew anything further other than the fact we can see that there is a sold sign. Now, she did not have any information at this time as to whom or for what, meaning will it remain residential, might they try and change that zoning or not, because I think it might have an impact on the current school property. So that's basically it. What are we doing about current school? What are we doing about East Street Farm? I mean, if you have to sell East Street Farm, and I realize that it needs all kinds of updates and so forth, and water connections and so forth. The fact of the matter is, I think it's really time to get off our duff. I think, Mark, at some point you said that there was an RFP on leasing the properties, or at least East Street Farm possibly. But really, we need to unload these things and do something with them, even if it is at some sort of a loss. If we continue to sit here and maintain these properties, I think there's some other little bits and pieces of land that the town owns. We continue to maintain. I don't know what we're holding on for. What are we going to wait 5 years to see if the real estate market gets better or whatever? I'm tired of talking about the subject, but that's my comment for the evening.
Thank you, Susan.
Yep.
Mark, if I may speak, it's Bill Regan.
Yes, sir.
I have a problem with the school system. And looking at the test scores, I find them to be abysmal. And to reward teachers who have not done their job, and I don't care if it's COVID or doing whatever or all the rest of it, the kids are not being taught up to, and they test to the curriculum, they can't pass the test. We have a 40% math score. The reading is a little bit better, but I think that we have to hold the teachers and the Board of Education and the Education Administration feet to the fire, because the kids aren't learning up to where they should. And keep pouring money into the teachers' salaries, benefits, et cetera, and the kids aren't learning is a crime. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Bill. Anybody else on Zoom? Going once? Going twice. All right, we'll close the public comment, and I will just commit as, with respect to Susan's questions about Kern School and East Street, to give everybody an update through the process on what we've done in terms of leasing our properties in the RPs and how it's impacted our revenues. And we can also definitely have a discussion about about Kern School and its the difficulties and the dilemmas involved there. But I can only assure everybody who I talk to who's concerned about that we have not lost sight of what we need to do in both of those things. So. All right, I'll close the public hearing. Anybody, any other comments? Close the public hearing. We didn't have public. I'll close public comment. And any other comments, questions? We got a lot of work to do together. We got a lot of work to do. Make sure that we're meeting the entire needs of the town. So we understand our task. If not, I will accept a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Just make note of everybody, the next Board of Selectmen regular meeting is February 5th. Please come, even if you weren't going to come, and stay afterwards to honor Diane. All right.